So, guys and girls, thank you for being in this impromptu space. It's pretty simple. We have finally a explanation over the alleged victory plan on the Ukrainian side. The space will cover a bit of his victory plan, what it actually means, because once again, we have a lot of bullshit in the plan, we have a lot of nonsense, we have stuff that is not feasible for the moment, but we have also the logic behind it, and we are going to try and have an answer with the logic, but also trying to reflect why suddenly we have so much Rada, why suddenly we have so much lies. Because I mean, like, guys, we are now the third day of an alleged North Korean battalion of 3,000 people, whereas the battalion is at maximum, if I'm even fucking blowing it up, at 800 to 900, where 18 North Koreans have already left their positions in Kursk and Bryansk to cross into Ukrainian lines, but somehow they haven't been found yet, and somehow they haven't deserted Ukraine. We have an absolute lack of integrity on pretty much every reporter on the Western side, and we are slowly getting to something we at Team War Criminal have said since literally 2022, that the only way for Ukraine to win or achieve anything in this war, medium and long term, would be a Western intervention. And we have it in full when it comes to the current Elensky plan. And let's actually start right away with the hilarity that plan is, because right now there is absolutely no way someone reads this shit in any kind of Western chancery and literally doesn't laugh or doesn't cry or both in succession. We're going to start immediately with the 5 points that were revealed. The first point was invitation of Ukraine to NATO. Actually, this is already a showstopper, not because we are not speaking about what the Russians want or what they will allow. Forget about that right now. Right now, we are just explaining, or at least giving some kind of hint of what this means. And the first point is actually the last. You don't need to think too much about this. The invitation to NATO, even within a shortened time frame, so somewhere between 6 months to a year, that like it happened for Sweden and Finland, you are going to be, well, within 6 months to a year, going to have a war between NATO and Russia. Why? Because you have the member states embroiled in the war, Article 5, a lot of small units are already there. You have this French disposition already in Romania. You have a couple of troops in the so-called eastern flank. Then you have all the nonsense between Rammstein and Poland. So generally speaking, if NATO wants to do some kind of sprint intervention just to make Russia react, they kind of have the forces. Now, this sprint intervention has a huge problem because, as I said, especially the French sector will get decimated, and within a month, we are going to have a far bigger problem because it's not going to be some kind of purely conventional war. French are going to go there with between 6,000 people, not all French, of course, to 8,000 people. They're going to get close up into a kind of cauldron by passing the PMR. If they don't take the PMR, they will literally be in a kill chain there. It's going to be a choke point, probably between 800 to 1,400 French. We're going to get killed, as much wounded. Some Romanians going to get off. Italians going to get off. Some Germans. So basically, it would be a shit show of a short intervention. That's why I think right now that intervention there is low chance. But given that the French now want to deploy division globally, of course globally, not just in Romania, and the Romanians are ongoing with the build of a base on that area for NATO. Within 2026, 2027, shit really hits the fan way deeper than we are. Right now, we are having a risk more or less Zaporozhye by bombing, Pokrovsk by takeover, and probably Konstantinovka and Drushkovka by takeover within 3 to 5 months. Anything else is still out there. It's not lost yet. But within 3 to 5 months, if things go as badly as they're going right now for the Ukrainians, Russians would be at 10 kilometers from Zaporozhye itself while completely fucking the shit up within the city. Then we go to basically the logic of the invitation from NATO to Ukraine, which means, as I said, the ability for the NATO members to activate Article 5 and then basically get busy in Ukraine. Now, the logic here is that Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine's invitation to NATO would serve as a proof of determination and signal how NATO partners envision Ukraine's role in the future security architecture. This makes no sense. Ukraine has no role in the future security architecture except for a battleground. Taking Ukraine in means going on the softer underbelly of the Russian Federation, which means absolute war between Russia and NATO. This is a predicament. It has not even like a chance in hell not to degenerate. I'm not even speaking about NATO troops attacking or getting involved in the war. I'm literally speaking NATO troops being within the territory of Ukraine would be liable to a strike. And because of the kinetic nature of this war and the inertia of this war, NATO would be really hard pressed to justify why the fuck they're there, unless, of course, as I said, to have a war. But they cannot limit that in Ukraine. That's the whole point. If NATO wants to go to Ukraine, they will have to strike in St. Petersburg, they would have to strike in Moscow. So, generally speaking, NATO going over a Russian tripwire in Ukraine creates something that nobody in NATO right now wants. It's not even a question mark right now. Right now, it's very simple. NATO wants a proxy war with a lot of damage to Russia, and they don't care how much Ukrainians get off, how much Ukrainians get destroyed. Because at the end, that's how the Americans see the world. Is basically, we're going to print dollars, we're going to rebuild you, whatever. Doesn't matter that you're literally 15 million at the end of the war. What matters is that we need to win. We need the W. And if we don't get a W, like in Afghanistan, Vietnam, whatever, well, it's too bad. You were shitty. And we're going to have all this bullshit about Soviet mentality still being present within Ukrainian forces. We had that a little bit with the counter. Then we had that a little bit with Avdiivka and all this shit. So, right now, the first point is a nonsense. Then, strength in defense. And this is the follow-up. As I said, first point is already a no-go, but the second point, which is a incremental development from the first point, which is operation strategic locations to prevent the creation of buffer zones within Ukraine, enhanced anti-aircraft defenses, joint efforts with partners to shoot down Russian aircraft, expanding the use of Ukrainian drones and missiles, removing restriction on the use of weapons, and providing access to partner intelligence. The probably few last points, which is removing restriction on the use of weapons, that's going to be a bit complicated, as I said, because it's not only the use of weapons, you need the quantity for it. The other point, providing access to partner intelligence, this is bullshit. We already know. The Americans themselves boasted that they are providing intelligence. They boasted that they are giving 24/7 in real-time intelligence. So this is nonsense. But what's important is includes operations in strategic locations to prevent the creation of buffer zones within Ukraine. Which means, and this is the funny part, that someone, who could that be, needs to attack Russia in Russia, and of course in its deployment points in Ukraine, and inflict enough damage that Ukrainian forces, which are right now fucked up, might reverse the situation. This is literally a NATO strike, for instance in Donetsk, for instance in Kursk, for instance in Belgorod, for instance in Bryansk. So basically, not only the border areas, but all over Russia, everything, and this is part of the United States law welfare manual, everything that aids to the conduct of military operations, their sustainment, and their planning is fair game, which means that what Zelensky is saying with this one is we need Americans to fucking strike Russia. We need NATO to strike Russia. And I said this already a couple of times. Right now, the Ukrainians do not have the equipment to make a huge barrage. What they have is their own drones, but as I said, just look at the results after Toropets. Look at the results after the strike in Krasnodar. Russians are moving forward. And right now, Russians secured a wonderful victory in Chasiv Yar when they can cross in over 4 points. And they are having the heights in Kalinove. They are taking over those heights. That means Chasiv Yar within 2 months is fucked if nothing happens. And if that one is fucked, Konstantinovka is fucked, Druzhkovka is fucked, everybody can go home. We are not speaking about what's going on right now in Kurakovo, where the Russians have crossed from Hostred towards Kurakovo, and they are already within the city. Don't forget, go check the defense map of Kurakovo. They have a huge, immense defensive line in front of the southern limits of the city. Russians are bypassing those from the fucking east, and they're gonna choke them up from the north. This failure cannot be reversed without a huge influx of people. And that's not gonna happen within a month unless they evacuate Kursk. But Kursk itself is a strategic operation to prevent, quote unquote, buffer zones within Ukraine. As simple as this. What they're doing in Kursk, never mind it's killing them in Kurakovo, it somehow works. They just tried the same in Zhuravka. In Zhuravka was only a raid. But they're gonna keep doing this because it's very simple for them. It's exactly what they did with Krinky. With Krinky, they're gonna fucking move somewhere. They're gonna get shut the fuck out. Russia's gonna bring equipment to chase them off, and their drone teams are just gonna pick equipment. This attrition will not change the war in Donbass. It will not change anything. Actually, just gonna get more of them killed and more civilians killed. Which is a point I'm gonna talk at the end of the space. So, what do we have right now? We have literally fucking madness. What Zelensky wants is first multiply strikes within Russia, second multiply the Kursk madness at every possible way he can. Be that in Kursk, be that in Belgorod, be that in fucking Bryansk. To me, I don't see any problem for him to start shit in Belarus or in PMR. We are, if I was the Russian leadership at this point, I would take out Zelensky. Not because he's dangerous for the Russians, but because he needs to be taken out so the person who is thinking this nonsense, probably Yermak, takes over and people start seeing how fucking unstable this guy is. Zelensky is just a fucking comedian at this point. I cannot believe anyone who's gonna tell me this dude wasn't high, or the person who wrote this wasn't high when they did that. But that's something else. Now, third point is deterrence. Zelensky called for deployment of a comprehensive non-nuclear deterrence package aimed at protecting Ukraine from Russian aggression and limiting Russia's capabilities. Like, which actual fucking non-nuclear deterrence package do you want to deploy and where? Is it going to be deployed in Ukraine? We go back to the first point we said. The moment you are in NATO, there is no deterrence whatsoever. You're just going to put your troops in harm's way. You cannot start justifying a Article 5 intervention while you are actually starting a war. But as I said, you cannot fight that war limited to Ukraine because you would beat the purpose of what you exactly were doing before, which was a proxy war. Now you're going to have an open war, which completely changed the threshold of Russian nuclear doctrine. And this is where the Americans already know this is going to go. That's why they looked at fucking Zelensky and they said, nigga, you're fucking crazy. You ain't Israel, bro. And it's simple. Israel was fired up with Shine ballistic missiles. With all due respect to Iran, guys, it was cheap. It was a good demonstration of how fucking shitty Western air defenses are to a small saturation attack. But they fucking brought them literal CVGs, carrier groups, for fuck's sake. Where is that in Ukraine? Nowhere. In Ukraine, they wouldn't even fucking extend another series of Abrams tanks. They are letting them rot in Kursk. Nobody's telling Zelensky pull them back. They literally saying, you know what, fucking kill as much Ukrainians as you want, so we're done with you. Trump is also a fucking problem, but it's not that much of an issue. As I said, Trump will not go, balls out. He's not gonna say Zelensky the first day he's in the office, Zhelia, please stop this shit or I'll cut your funding. That's not gonna happen, unfortunately, because right now that is also making a lot of money for the US military industrial complex. Not as much as they would, but still it's good enough. It's good profit. Both is basically US money, it's Ukrainian money, and it's also European money, because a lot of the shit that the Ukrainians need right now is not produced by the EU. Let's be honest with that. So for the Americans, this is all good. They don't want too much of it. They don't want to start whole processes, because they also know what the white elephant is, just the same as everybody else in the sector. But for them, for about 10 years, it's fine. They have enough orders. They're going to make a little bit more money, especially with Europeans getting all scared and wanting F-35 and whatnot. So it's fine. Everybody's cool with it. However, deploying troops in there, deploying armored forces would mean staging grounds, would mean exactly what's happening to the Russians. Americans would have to put these fucking troops either disguised within the civilians, as it happened with Kursk, or in proper military camps. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to eat an Iskander, but it's not going to be fucking Saudi Arabia in 1990. It's not going to be one failed Scud. It's going to be a couple of dozen Iskanders up their asses, and then we're going to have a real fucking war. And the Americans do not want that. Right now, they don't want this shit. The only thing they want is both sides getting tired enough, sitting at a table, and accepting some bullshit agreement about how Ukraine is going to be in the EU, and trying to get into NATO, and how Russia is going to keep parts of Ukraine, but not legally. So it's going to completely solve the situation. And 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have a rematch. Probably going even worse for Ukraine from the get-go. Because within 10, 15, 20 years, as I said, the Chinese problem is going to blow up. And given the fracture within Europe between Russia and the rest of the European continent, Russia is going to join the Chinese constellation. And the Chinese will do everything to equip Russia in such a way with things that the Russians do not have themselves. In such a way that Russia would serve as it's basically glacis towards the West. And the Russians will be willing to do that. The Russian situation with the Chinese is like the Ukrainian situation with the Europeans. Ukrainians are willing to die just to spite the Russians. Russians will be willing to die just to fuck up the Europeans. And this is, in a certain sense, despite being a strategic failure for the US, in a certain sense, they limit the damage there. Because, okay, Europe is going to the shitter, but at least it remains an obedient bitch for the American interest. So, you didn't manage the girl you wanted, but you had her sister or cousin, doesn't really fucking matter. Now, The fourth point is funny. The fifth is the funniest, actually, guys. The fourth point is the funny. Development of strategic and economic potential. And I'm like, what exactly? Most of the Ukraine's potential until now was related to industries where it was getting beaten by the Russians. And the only thing it worked, it was because of the a concomitant network between Russia and Ukraine. That's how Ukraine, the moment they had this shit show with Russia, their GDP went to shit. And it took almost 8 years to quote-unquote recover, but we know that it didn't because Ukraine pegged its currency. So basically inflation in Ukraine didn't really matter. It wasn't a real thing. Now that the currency starts to refloat again, its controllable floatability as they call it, they went from 36 to 42. In a matter of weeks, I'll say months, just to be honest with, the joke itself, but in a matter of weeks, it started to go wrong. So let the hryvnia float properly, and you are going to get a Ukrainian currency roughly within $55. 55 hryvnia for $1, which would mean almost a double, a loss of value of 60 to 70%. That's huge. That's absolutely nonsensical. But the problem is not that much the loss of value. The problem is that Ukraine right now was still a net importer. It didn't matter if it was from Russia, from Poland, from Germany. This net import economy, especially after the war, would mean that the inflation spiral within Ukraine that will last for at least 5 to 10 years because Ukraine would need to rebuild. Even the war stops now, you have, as Ukrainian, probably somewhere between 80 to 90 billion dollars to reimburse. On top of those 80 to 90 billions, because the whole debt is about 165, 167 billion. On top of those, you will have to import a lot of shit to rebuild, as I said, economical bases, which in Ukraine right now are not competitive at all. Ukraine was, as I said, competitive in a certain sense because the market structure and system was basically adjacent to the Russian one. So, I mean, from my personal experience, from my own trade, when I couldn't have something from Russia, I had it 100% from a Ukrainian reseller. So it was pretty much logical. But now that you have cut those bones and you're competing with these guys, you are not in the same process. You are smaller. If you want to check it, you check out wheat. Everybody was happy that Ukraine was going back to export as much wheat as it did before the war. Meanwhile, Russians have tripled the fucking exports from Black Sea. The output, the ground they are sowing has doubled already. And this, as I said, is because one side decided to create choke points for the other. On top of it, Russia took out at least 30 to 40% of, for instance, Ukraine's industrial output. Steel is gone, coke is gone. With Pokrovsk and the whole basin, you will have roughly somewhere between 20% of the GDP that's going to be affected permanently. We are not speaking about, loss of GDP because of the invasion. We are speaking something that will never go back. And if Russia wants to completely break Ukraine, they do not need Odessa. They just take out Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk, and go to Kamiansk, and it's done. They lose 3 dams, so 3 hydroelectrical centrals. They will lose at least 2 more thermal power plants, which are hardly affected. Krakow, that is getting disputed right now, will be yet another TPP going for Ukraine, although it's not really in proper operation. It's just fired up to keep some extra capacity. But generally speaking, for Russia, if they want to break Ukraine, they do not need to go too far. And so the whole point right now, when we speak about economic potential, would would mean basically beyond the Dnieper. Beyond the Dnieper, there is nothing else. So yeah, you're gonna keep Nikolaev, but we saw what happens to Nikolaev. They got their tank repair plant completely fucked up. Odessa is getting targeted in order for the Russians to bring air defense. Sorry guys, air defense out of the hiding. And for Dnieper, it's pretty simple. As much as you're gonna start defending this shit, if you start piling up Patriot missiles all over Dnieper, the Russians gonna find them. It's just a matter of time, and you're gonna start losing core elements of those systems, and then your whole, invincibility bubbles that Ukrainians want to actually do with this, it's stupid shit, is gonna turn against you, because the investment to have these iron cordon, let's say it like this, would dwarf what you need to actually conquer your territories. When you read the plan itself, it's pretty stupid. It's pretty basic, because it literally shows only two things, and that is that right now the Ukrainians do not seem capable or do not seem willing on their own to go back to get those territories. Just read it again, because it's something pretty funny. It's extremely funny, and this makes it a bit stupid, a bit retarded, but it's exactly what we said from the beginning. So, when you read everything that's on the United 24 media, you do not see anything that says we're going to recover territory. So, let's go. First point, invitation of Ukraine to NATO would serve as proof of determination, signaling how NATO parties envision Ukraine's role in future security architecture. Okay, fine. This point includes operation in strategic locations to prevent the creation of buffer zones within Ukraine, expanding the use of Ukrainian drones and missiles, removing restrictions on the use of weapons, and providing access to partner intelligence. Still nothing about recovering the ground that we have lost. What they said is just preventing buffer zones within Ukraine. Unless the buffer zones are 20% of your territory, which would be a pretty way of wording it. And then we have deterrence, deployment of comprehensive non-nuclear deterrence package aimed at protecting Ukraine from Russian aggression and limiting Russia's capabilities. So what? Either you strike Russia, either you deploy these troops, and you do what? We still not have, it's the third fucking point, and we do not have helping Ukraine regain its territory. It's not in writ. Development of strategic economic potential. Like, this is the whole point. How are you going to develop this if you don't say in your plan that you will fight to get back your territory? It should be written completely visible and obvious, but it's not there. And at the fifth point. Point number 5 is the most hilarious shit that you will read. Post-war contribution to NATO. After the war, the Ukrainian military could apply its experience to bolster NATO and European defense efforts. The president also suggested that Ukrainian forces could eventually replace the US contingent in certain areas. And I'm like, okay, you 404, which will be somewhere between 25 and 27 million if the war stops now, are going to replace American troops in Europe, the roughly 130,000 of them, in all kinds of and fucking locations, which would be, in the best case scenario, 1/3 of your military force. With what planes, with what tanks, with what equipment? Who will pay for this? Because let's be honest, as I said, this whole shit is Ukraine dropping down to after the war, without the aid, without the loans, without everything. At probably around, we're gonna see it's roughly around $120 billion dollars of GDP, real convertible GDP. And if the real GDP starts getting where I think it is, so basically with the hryvnia going to 55, the real GDP should be around 110 billion max. So you will have this fucking shit nation and economic system which is gonna be smaller than Romania, with a worse GDP than Romania, with people that would either be working hard to rebuild whatever they can, so the greed and the theft and the corruption is gonna fucking start booming. These guys gonna get deployed as what exactly? This is literally the hobo ranting on the street. You know, it's the guy you're gonna fucking cross every day who has cheap booze, who is completely wasted, who is rotten to the fucking core, telling you, oh man, I'm gonna fucking defend. Like, for fuck's sake, what the hell is this? And the whole 5 points could be literally stopped at the first. Invitation to NATO. NATO takes over and then we have a shit show. But the thing that is missing, but probably it's not because, you know, we have only a few points. We don't have the whole plan. First of all, there are no technical details. They are like fucking shit shot in the air. It's true that we do not read reconquering, liberating, getting back to the borders of. That's extremely vague. And in a certain sense, it looks like Ukraine is going more and more towards, you know what, we're going to let something go there. But we also know through Minsk 1 and 2, through the missteps in 2022 in March, to the missteps over the grain deal, to the missteps over the energy deal in 2024, that Ukrainians lied. At Timor criminal, you know what we say. Unfortunately for one of our members, sorry, but when piggers breathe, piggers lie. And that's the whole fucking problem. This thing is, in a certain sense, kryptonite to anyone who wants to actually have a discussion. Because you're going to have this plan where everything hinges on the US saying, okay, we're going to get Ukraine to NATO, so we're going to go to war with Russia. And we got exactly where we said we would be in 2022. And now we're going there towards 2025. Ukraine wants to be in NATO so NATO can take over the war and win it for them. Last space I said what Zelensky wants from all this shit is literally to have at hand the US arsenal, be that by proxy or just getting the supplies, and wield that power. Zelensky actually, as a Žid, wants to be Israel, but unfortunately is not. And that, I think, pisses him extremely over. He sees this speck of a country in the Near East getting spoiled and holding the Americans by their sentimental balls, and he's mad. And of course, there is a huge difference between who these guys are fighting. You got the assembly of kleptocrats all over the place who have sold their souls and who have like accepted the 30 coins from Uncle Sugar just to, like, you know, close their eyes and say that shit doesn't exist. Gaza doesn't exist. And Gaza only exists when the local population gets extremely agitated. But beyond that, no. And you have Ukraine, which is, quote unquote, at the heart of Europe, facing Uganda with nukes, Nigeria on the Don, whatever you want to fucking call them. And they're literally fucking raping you. You get beaten the shit out of you. You're Ukraine. And you're gonna fucking post gore, you're gonna fucking post losses. But at the end, when people look at the map, you are not cool, man. You're getting cooked. And that's the truth. The Ukrainians, I made a small like answer to some fucking retard. Okay, it's a low hanging fruit, that guy. But Ukraine doesn't have the manpower to go beyond this shit. And it doesn't matter how much the Russian economy is gonna fucking crumble. Ukraine right now doesn't have the means. Zelensky knows the trend. That's why Kursk was so shitty. The whole point with Kursk was to break that fucking border, go as far as possible, grab some juicy places, and then say, oh, you know what? We're gonna be there because NATO's gonna fucking support us. And that shit went sideways. NATO immediately said, oh, these guys are absolutely fucking crazy. And then they are in a situation when they are selling Kursk shit that is unfathomably bad. Today, the 25th battalion showed how two murders were fighting against Russians. Unfortunately for them, in their fucking footage, we saw a VAB that was stuck. And that VAB is featuring in another footage, this time from the Russian side, when it's burned. And we also have a crispy footage of the same two murders. One was killed trying to get out of Veseloy, and then another one was killed trying to go towards Veseloy. So this is where Ukraine is. Ukraine is selling shit. Ukraine is selling L's every fucking single day and passing them as victories because they killed Russians. The only victory Russia hasn't got yet is to stop Ukrainians from being inhuman bitches in their PR. But in a sense, it's a huge victory because the Ukrainian soul right now is poisoned. They have no problem showing themselves as cruel, assholes, benefiting from the concealment of the victim. But actually what I'm seeing more and more, when you're losing, you tend to, be more violent, to be more gorish. That's what happened to ISIS, that's what happened to HTS, that's what happened to the headquarters in Syria, everywhere actually. They ended up the aggression, they ended up the violence, they ended up the gore and the cruelty. Didn't stop them from getting beaten. And the other problem is that more and more the shoe is going to be on the other foot. We had that in Kursk with the execution of the drone assholes. We had that in Minograd with the execution of the whole fucking platoon. This is what they're going to get. And their only victory will be to get the Russians to be as fucked up as them. In my personal opinion, I don't care. Because the kind of war that Russians wanted to fight in 2022 was completely outdated. Like these completely blurry images of something getting struck. Sometimes you're going to have a good image like the book that got absolutely vaporized by Iskander. But most of the time, everybody complained. I was like, I don't really fucking care. I know people died there. It's just a matter. But at some point, you change completely your tone. And reading the nonsense that fucking Zelensky is writing right now, I'm sorry, but this pushes me a lot more towards the absolute dismantling of the Ukrainian military in Donbass. Right now, reading this, I'm like, these people, they haven't learned their lesson. They don't want peace. They literally the meme, I don't want fucking peace, I want problems always. This is exactly what's going on with Zelensky. He's upping the ante. He's this, this nasty kid that you probably had all at school. When, you beat the shit out, you throw him away, and he's gonna come back and come back and come back. And now the West sees this underdog that never gives up. No, it's just a fucking nuisance. It's a fucking loose cannon that you need to put down. It's a stray dog. But this, you understand when you grow up older. when you grow up older, you see that, oh, this guy is fucking lost. He has much for brains. There is nothing to get from him. Therefore, I think that it's big time for the Russian leadership to make a choice over Zelensky. It will not change much. It just will show who exactly is behind him. And I'm not speaking about the Americans. I'm really speaking about the team behind Zelensky. Because there is no way Zelensky, after 3 years of an absolute beating of the Ukrainian nation, still goes there and said, you know what? We're going to go at the end full cocoa. We're going to go nuclear war in Europe. And this is going to solve our solution. And it's true that he says non-nuclear deterrent. But I'm like, what exactly are you talking about non-nuclear deterrent? You're going to have to strike Russia from a NATO perspective, which means now Russia will have to strike you back. And I already explained this. If I was Russia, wanted to strike back after an attack, I will fucking erase the Baltic Chihuahuas. I would actually, to be honest, I will go straight to Finland, because Finland proposes the best bang for the buck. As I said, 1.7 million are in the Helsinki metropolitan area. That is like 30% of the population. There's a huge border, which is mostly impracticable between Russia and Finland. Their military force outside of actual war is absolutely shitty. About 70,000 people, all in, with about a 30,000 fighting force. I'm not saying it's going to be a walk in the park. Just don't think that. But once you hit a huge metropole like Helsinki, and these guys suddenly have, like, I'm sorry to say, 200,000-300,000 casualties, the whole system of defense is crumbling. The logistical lines are gone. And the only way to save Finland, I'm not saying an invasion, just on a strike, would be for America to actually strike you back with nukes. And it's mad. And everybody's dead. This is how Zelensky's plan is off the fucking bat. Zelensky is ready to cause nuclear holocaust in Europe. Instead of admitting the rule of the fucking world, which is you get to open your way to the strongest. Might makes right. It doesn't matter what you think. Everything that is quote unquote legal, normalized and everything is an exception. It is an exception. Every single regulation, norm is there, the byproduct of a strong army on one side. The Chinese, European, US brawl right now is exactly that. The Chinese couldn't do much for most of the 20th century. They got humiliated, invaded, cut through, downtrodden, and then they rose from the ranks. Same for Russia in a certain sense. So, yes, these revanchist, quote-unquote, revisionist powers are just giving you back what you gave them for 2-3 centuries. It's how the game is played. People who are refusing this by saying, oh, but we have rules. No, you made the rules when you were on top. Now the guys that were down are coming back on top. This is how it's played. And refusing this, trying to fucking have this discussion about, oh, but we need to cooperate. All the fucking BRICS nonsense, multipolarity, will not work before some dues are paid. And those dues are very simple. You are a smaller country, you have less power to influence things, you're going to get crushed. If you are good enough and you are within the interest of the bigger power, look at Mexico. Mexico got chopped off a part of its territory. And now everybody's speaking about how the Medora system is great for the US. It's just exploitation of the Mexican manpower. What's the same for China? This is not a win-win system. This is a system where exploitation is dressed as win-win. But then when things change, look at China. Suddenly it's not win-win anymore. Suddenly it's over capacity. Suddenly it's, oh, they don't respect ethical norms, green norms, whatever. So overall, what Zelensky is trying to do here is trying to avoid the wheel of time. Zelensky is still choking with Fukuyama's dick about the end of history. History is never gone. And that's the fucking problem. And unfortunately, Russia is too big right now for Ukraine and a lot of people in Europe. And you'll have to take it, exactly what Putin said. Yes, my beauty, you'll have to take it. And this comes exactly from my own perspective as a Balkanic guy. We'll have to take it. We'll have to fucking endure the Europeans being assholes to us, despite the fact that most of them couldn't wash their fucking asses 2,000 years ago. We have to endure Germans yapping like shit, where they were still fucking painting their bodies 1,000 years ago. Then what? That's how history works. So the fact Zelensky wants to avoid that, in a certain sense, I understand him. Because, you know, he put himself in a certain pedestal, and then he cannot understand why it failed. And of course, we can explain to him. Everybody with like 20 IQ can explain to Zelensky why the whole fucking house of cards fell down. And in a great part, America is responsible for that. America who literally disarmed Europe. And now America is literally fucking over Germany and a huge part of the European, old Europe actually, industrial system. Europe not being able to make its own decisions, I'm sorry to say this, it has nothing to do with Europe being divided. It has to do with the fact that Europe is being completely controlled. Their transatlantic relationship, that does not work for Europe the same way. America could be a customer of European goods and financial products for ages. When America almost got tits up in 2008, what happened? Where are the lawsuits? America is Bernie Madoff. The problem is that he also is the judge, the executioner, and has the jail. This is not like some kind of anti-American rant. I don't give a fuck anymore. I saw everything I needed to see. I thought that these people were serious enough, for instance, at some point to say, Ukrainians, guys, stop lying. But the Americans are entertaining the whole fucking North Korean shit show. And it's true, it was a bit naive of me to think differently, especially since Colin Powell with his fucking vial at the USNC telling this is fucking anthrax. I'm like, but at some point, I thought this was a serious war. When you're gonna start saying the things as they are, not starting to invent shit, not starting to fucking pump the Ukrainians even more by saying, oh, you know what, those 600,000 casualties, they're real, man. I'm not saying that they are very far from that, but there is no sense. Like this is like having a junkie and inciting that guy to take even more coke. And of course people say, yeah, but it's normal, it's Ukraine, they need to fucking keep up fighting. If you start saying to them that half of their fucking brigades are understaffed, that they have a desertion ratio of like 10% of the fucking military force, yeah, that's the fucking truth. Otherwise you get the situation we have right now, when Zelensky's only chance to succeed is infinite nuclear war. So, yeah, that's the plan. That's the fucking plan right now. And in a certain sense, I'm as pissed as I'm relieved. First of all, because, you know, like, everybody with 20 IQ could see where the Ukrainians were going with this. But my biggest problem is that I'm seeing European leaders, especially CDU's Merz in Germany, who are absolutely walking this path. I'm seeing Baerbock, who went to the Bundestag and said, like, we're gonna help fucking Israel destroy whole fucking civilian neighborhoods because of the practices of Hamas. And I'm like, for fuck's sake, Israel's colonies are literally the same thing. Israelis bring colonists armed, put a small garrison around them, and just grab territory and kill people. The difference is the superiority in firepower. You know, you have these things that when you start reading them together, you start thinking these people hate humanity. They have this one-sided vision where they're at the top. They're the greatest, they're the purest. They have the knowledge. They should have the power to decide who lives, who dies, who's right, who's wrong. This God syndrome within the West is absolutely pathetic because it's stopping most of the Western politicians to see what's happening to their fucking control. And what's happening to this control is that it's eroding every single day. We're year 3 and Turks still sell shit to the motherfucking Russians. And they don't give a fuck. Russians still find people to cooperate with them. And a lot of these guys, they don't even do it for the money. Because once they get caught, they're burned. Deep down myself, I think I know why they're doing it. They're doing it because they hate the West. It's not that hatred that you see every single day, you know, it's not, oh, we're gonna all kill you. No, it's disdain. For the Chinese, it's a grudge. It's a 100-year humiliation grudge. For the Turks, it's the same thing. They feel humiliated, especially when it comes to Europe. And they feel they have been used, and it's normal. It's absolutely normal. The Syrian situation even, you know, like, made it even worse. Near East, Middle East, this guy's gonna suck to everyone, but if that can help the Russians stick it to the Americans, best thing ever. You make money, you see America dead. Fine. Then, of course, you're going to have other people who are not moved by hatred. It's opportunism, but also they feel that there will be an after. The current system is looking fragile, and the hope for some of these people, like the Indians, for instance, is that this shit is going to fucking crumble to a point when they're going to start taking over some of the levers of power. And of course, China is part of this, but the Chinese, as I said, they have this double, triple grudge. And then you get the Russians. For them, I'm not going to fucking present, there's a loss of imperium, but there's also a complete, because this is the thing, I think, for the Russians, it's the lack of respect, and it had nothing to do with the war. Prior to the war, from the end of the Cold War to, let's say, 2003, the Russians were looked as trash. Like, it was a joke. Even today, NAFOids and a lot of Westerners say, oh, we're going to make the Russians beg for bread like in the 90s. This is who these people are too. And how do you think it makes everyone feel who has heard Putin for 20 years say that the Westerners are like that, being exposed to exactly that? And everybody's saying, yeah, but the Russians are waging a war. Doesn't matter. I do not see how a war between Russia and Ukraine is pushing people to go back and wishing the worst to the Russians, and going to this hyperbole, which actually shows how the fuck you feel about them disregarding the war. We're not going to speak about the Baltics. We're not going to speak about the Finnish. We're not going to speak about the Poles and a couple of fringe groups within the Central European countries. We are going to speak about Canadians, about the Americans, French, Spanish, all these Westerners who actually are not really impacted by this war. If Ukraine loses tomorrow, actually a lot of the trade within Europe and Russia restarts, and there is a recovery. How much? Not that long, for sure. But historically, it had never made sense what's going on right now. Right now, every single negative aspect of a past war within Europe is being reinforced every single day. Nobody wants to find a solution, and everybody's going to say, yeah, because both sides. No, it has nothing to do with the fact that both sides think they're going to win. It has to do with the fact that a fringe group of people who are at the helm of, let's say, both sides, but mostly in Europe, are putting a selective, ethical, according to them, choice before the well-being of their nations, generally speaking. Everybody's going to say, oh, there is a lack of vision, this and that. There is a lack of vision. There is a situation where both sides, Europe and Russia, are going so far apart that even when attempts are going to be done after the war to bring them closer by a lot of nonsense, it's not going to gel anymore. Because a lot of the ruptures that we're seeing are being priced in. The Germans right now understand that a big part of their industry is obsolete without a couple of specific items. Cheap energy from Russia or elsewhere, I'm not discussing it, was one of those. That thing is gone. The investment made to cover up that gap between Russian energy and the replacement, the substitution, has put a definitive cost to it. And that cost is forced to be priced in to the consumers as time goes by. If you want an example, a very stupid one, of course, is the ban of crossing the Russian Federation's airspace to fly to Asia. But because this is not a blanket ban, it's only against unfriendly countries, you end up with de facto the Chinese or some Asian companies which are not unfriendly being able to fly over Russia, cutting short distance, fuel, and cost. I'm not saying that this is breaking the back of anyone. No, I'm just saying these are the small things that are making a natural complement between Western Europe and Russia break up to the seams. And going back to something that never was like this. We are going back 800 years. And unfortunately for a lot of people within Europe, we are going back to extreme right thesis when it goes to how Europe is seen. The problem is those extreme right theses, they don't have the market in Europe anymore. Like Europe is becoming more quote-unquote diverse. So the whole, Nazi vision of how Europe is supposed to look and how the Slavo-Mongol hordes are supposed to look from yesteryear, right now they don't work. They just don't work anymore. There is no logic into that. This rupture is purely political, but it's becoming more and more definitive because the policy is in the hands of a few select people, and Zelensky is part of that frenzy. And if you want a definition, it's like you are buying liquefied natural gas from the US where you have a fucking pipeline ready to go from Russia of right now roughly 12% cheaper, but it could become even cheaper if you actually stop being an asshole as a European, and of course Russia changes its tune over certain issues. This is the whole point. This is the madness we have been speaking about since 2022. The war wasn't necessary. The war was avoidable. But it wasn't avoidable in the sense that Europe tries to sell it. Ukraine is not making a decision based on its interest. And as I said, you can see how Ukraine's GDP evolved after the cut from Russia. The transformation of the Ukrainian economy was obtained by actually lying about the Ukrainian economy. The Ukrainian economy went from, a rather okay state in 2012 to the poorest country in Europe by 2021. And then you had the invasion. And then you have the war. And I know people are going to say, yeah, but there have been a lot of changes from within, countries that we thought were intertwined. Czech Republic, Slovakia, the separation between Kosovo and Serbia, and so on and so forth, Montenegro, Serbia. That's bullshit. That's absolutely bullshit. The relationship, for instance, Slovakia and Czech Republic, of course, it's not the same country anymore, and the language is kind of the same, but they are both submitted to a higher centrifugal force, which is Germany. Nobody's contesting that. Actually, those two fucking countries wanted to be within the German umbrella because of its economical power. And despite the fact that the fucking Germans did Munich in 1938. So where is the problem here? Well, the problem is pretty simple. When it is needed, when your target can be vilified, Holodomor, the suppression of Ukrainian nationalism, the suppression of Ukrainian leadership, whatever. There are enough ways to turn people around pretty fast. And this is a matter of imperial power from the Russians, from the Americans, from the European perspective. Playing on the wounds will always work. Like right now, Albanians have this, I'd say, animosity towards a lot of our neighbors for almost nothing. There is no logic. There is no war right now. I'm not going to say that it's like this friendship, peace, whatever, but still, some of the aspects around Kosovo and Macedonia are still pumped up for nothing. Especially as I said, if we have to think within this Albanian mindset, we had what we wanted. Okay, there is still a chunk of Macedonia that some of the fringest elements of Albanian nationalism want from Macedonia, because 25%, 40%, whatever Albanian population is there. But there is no need for that. There is no logic for that. There is no actual problem, because nobody is ratcheting up that nationalist frenzy anymore. Actually, we are being looked at stupid sometimes. And a couple of times the Kosovars themselves have been called off by the Americans over how they see things. But that's not the case with Ukraine. With Ukraine, you got investment on how to make it look like the Russians are a complete alien race from Ukraine. They've never been there. We have the Crimean Tatars. That's the funniest story. These people consider themselves as indigenous from Crimea. They have never been. But they are fucking reinforced by a cultural and subversive investment from the West. Like, what the fuck? I mean, at this rate, within 100 years, if things turn sour, we're going to have Turks claiming that half of Albania was Turkish. This is just to tell you guys, that's the fucking problem we have right now. Nobody's thinking about this war and how to end it. What people are thinking is how to find a way to make it look that they should win. And this way, how they should win it is to fucking put more people to the meat pack. And in this case, of course, Ukrainians. And of course, you got all this discussion over the lowering of the conscription age and all this shit. We see clearly where they fucking want to go. They want an attempt of a, once again, critical and decisive battle somewhere, a kind of Kharkov on steroids, which they cannot fight properly because of logistical hurdles, because of population hurdles, because also of the Russians themselves. So what's happening now is very simple. You just go all in and propose the unfathomable, which is NATO intervention, Russian reply, escalation on both sides, and mushroom season all over Europe, as it stands. So anybody who is not a Ziegler and who wants to, applaud Zelensky plan, the Zelensky plan, by saying that the Russians started the war, the problem is that Russians can also end it, but it's not going to be funny for everyone. So right now, the only sane thing to do is to cut the motherfucker off, find someone who's less brain dead as him, sit on the table, make some choices by understanding, this I'm speaking from the European perspective, by understanding that if the war doesn't end soon enough, the European economy will be impacted in ways that it will not be able to sustain the competition against the Chinese soon enough. Especially in the overall rift that is now, I think, definitive between Russia and Europe. Because you guys are laughing, but the European continent is missing about 20% of its population right now. Because Russia is not among the European concert. That loss, it's a limb that's gone away. And Europeans think that this is fine. They think that this is perfect. They're happy about it. Not every European, of course, I'm speaking about the leadership. Because everything is the predicament. And the predicament is that, I'm going to repeat, history was gone after the Cold War. Europe was going to expand, dominate, be on top of everything, and everything would be fine. Russia, who cares? The smaller Russias with us, and we are going to grow and grow and imposing ourselves until you are with us or you're against us. Funny thing is that that brain-dead attitude, that brain-dead vision from the end of the Cold War is exactly what's killing us today. And the only way to change this is for the European leadership to understand what they're losing. Not about the war, but about the loss of Russia as a part of the European continent, as a part of the European system. Everything else doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the war in Ukraine is turning more and more on a struggle to keep Russia European. Losing it is a bit like Brzezinski was saying over Ukraine and Russia. Russia is an empire once it has Ukraine. Well, Europe has a global reach with Russia. Without it, it's just a stub on the fucking Northern Sea and the Atlantic. That's it. Now, after this was said and done, there is one very bad byproduct of the plan that Zelensky has laid out. The byproduct is that this plan is literally painting a target on Ukrainian civilians. And that is clearly visible when he lays out the fact that there shouldn't be any buffer zones within Ukraine. And I'm like, the problem with the buffer zone in Ukraine is a local cleansing of the population living in that zone. Either you capture the population, either you push it out. In any case, you deprive it temporarily of its means of subsistence. In this case, for instance, you chase them away or they are evacuated. Think at Suja, think at Sumy, think at Volchansk. They're evacuated. The productive means that you have in those areas are mostly either taken over or destroyed. Volchansk, parts of Sumy, parts of Suja. And this means that these people need to find another job, need to subsist somehow. And this subsistence is subservient to how they're going to get paid or how they're going to get, supplied. And for instance, when it comes, for instance, to Suja or to areas around Nikolaev, all these people that were busy with the agricultural sector, the loss of, fixed capital was also very important because, they had their machinery destroyed, their stores destroyed, and so on and so forth. Then you got the replacement capital, which is the grains for the sowing period, and the cattle, whatever you want to fucking call it. By pointing out these buffer zones, the main target for these buffer zones on both sides is going to be the population. So Zhelia is pointing out where the war is moving. What he wants to do is basically move it towards the Russian side so the Russians can feel the war. But on the other side, the Russians are replying, especially in Sumy, with bombs. So Zhelia, by his actions, is doing a buffer on both sides. Maybe this is not very interesting for the Russians, because what they want is a buffer on the Ukrainian side alone. But at the end, for the Ukrainians, this doesn't change anything. For instance, in Kursk, the quote-unquote buffer zone is actually killing more Ukrainians and destroying more Ukrainian sheep than Russian ones. And I said why. The area they chose was sparsely populated compared to, for instance, Sumy, which is a 250,000 inhabitant city. And the means on the Russian side, especially the air bombs, are completely different. So Zelensky, with his plan, with these undertones, is literally going for it and making it more dangerous for Ukrainian civilians to sustain this war. Because this goal of going up a notch with his strategic operations means that the Russians are going to reply in sense. So let's say you're going to have to move from Chernigov towards Bryansk. Russians going to reply by bombing Chernigov, another big city. You're going to have to evacuate those people. So you are getting to a situation where Elensky is actually completely swiftly changing the axis of the battle. On one side, he speaks about how he wants to only hurt the enemy, infrastructure, military, and so on. But on the other side, he is inviting the Russians, especially when you take into account how Kursk was staged and prepared. He's inviting the Russians to make the areas uninhabitable for the Ukrainian civilians, even more adding to the burden of the Ukrainian states on supplying them. Now, with this, there is a byproduct, in a certain sense. The more citizens lose their jobs, their livelihoods, there is this, thinking that, oh, he has nothing to lose anymore, he's going to fucking go to the army. But this is rebalanced by the fucking tension that these guys that are going to become IDPs, so internally displaced people, are going to cause on an already stranded fabric within the Ukrainian regions they're going to go. And we've had complaints about people from Kharkov moving to Lviv and getting treated as shit because they spoke Russian, because they were looked upon as they were Russian spies or cockroaches or colorads, whatever you want to call that. This is how things are going to work in a certain sense. So on one side, it's not very productive in short term for the Russians, but in the longer term, the tensions that this is creating, but also the displacement of the population, is slowly getting these people to move away from the border areas and also shrink naturally the Ukrainian presence there. Because in most of these towns, you're going to have military more, as I said, the militarization of the border that the Russians initially had no plan on how to do. Zelensky is about to do it himself with his buffer point operations. Vovchansk was partially raised. If things get from bad to worse in Sumy, Aktivka, over 20 kilometers of urban centers, of peri-urban centers are going to be raised as well. Same thing if they try to do something on Chernigov. So the plan of being strategically coy from the Ukrainian side is actually damaging even more the civilian balance within the country itself. But also, slowly, is making these guys desert the fringes of the territory and naturally reduce the controlled territory on itself. And potentially also making possible for the Russians, if they want in the future, to have breakthroughs there. And also, they are extending the front line to be manned from both sides, which in the case of Ukraine having less troops, makes the whole deal even more stupid. But you already said this, that he's not the smartest cookie in the fucking jar, so. So there you go, guys. Basically, the plan is an absolute shit show. It hinges on them being accepted to NATO and NATO taking over the war for them and fighting it to the latest European, most probably, because I do not see, this blowing up. But you never know, given how things can turn for the worse. Then we can have probably two continents getting completely ashed. If it gets to the worst scenario, which I do not believe, but yeah, you can never be sure about that. So yeah, guys, that was it. I really think that they really should find a solution for Zelensky. Either put the real guy in charge, which I think is Yermak. Either just put the mute on this dude, because right now the plan is an absolute shit show. And it's also unsellable from my perspective. Like, first of all, you don't need to sell it to Russia. Of course, you need to sell it to the Europeans and Americans, but point 2, point 3, and point 5 are hilariously bad. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for the space. Hopefully we're going to have more technical details over it, how he thinks about doing that. But as I see, the logistical impact of this shit show is going to be way too big. Way too big. So on short term, I completely understand what Zelensky wants to do, which is basically save that logistical burden to NATO by literally saying, you know what, you need to come, guys. Don't give us ammunition. Don't tell us how to war. Just go and come here and fight and show us how it's done. In a certain sense, I perfectly understand. And there is a madness, a logical madness on Zelensky's part. But on the other side, he comes across as an asshole, an arrogant asshole, and, well, it's a bit what he is, let's be honest. Thank you very much, guys. If you have any kind of question or intervention, it's up to you. I'm not going to be very long on this one. If you want, up to you. If you don't want, that will be it. Come on, Kremlin.
Hey, so yeah, I just wanted to add my 2 cents because, like, my mind has really been on the whole North Korean troops being pushed bullshit, which is obviously bullshit. Like, you don't have what are 3,000 North Korean troops going to do? Like, just think about it. It's absolutely nothing. It's basically the amount of people that signed with the Russian MOD in what, 3 days. And for the people who have actually been paying attention to previous information about, volunteers wanting to fight on the Russian side, they understand one thing is that a lot of them actually kind of are a burden because they do not speak the language. They are not trained according to Russian military doctrine, right? So they're not really helpful. What I think and I believe you also raised a similar point, is basically Zelensky's want to kind of like justify and say, hey, look, there's another, a third actor that is directly involved in the war, troops on the ground, blah, blah, blah. So why aren't you doing the same for me, right? Which is an open invitation to any fucking schizo country within NATO who has a big enough grudge against the Russians to actually send in a small contingency, but officially, right? And this is where all this shit gets very blurry because, as always, I'm going to give you what is the Romanian perspective, what's being pushed in the media over here, right? And people are kind of like saying, yeah, we can't shoot down Russian missiles, even if Zelensky is asking us to do, because we will become a part of the conflict. And this has been explicitly said by the biggest NATO bootlickers, dick riders here in Romania, that if we do that, if we get into the conflict, if we become part of the conflict, Article 5 is off the table, right? It's basically like we just went around, fucked around, and we want to fight the Russians. Okay, we want to fight the Russians, we're going to do it on our own two balls, right? And if the Russians want to hit us back, then tough luck, motherfucker. Tough luck. So that's why they're not doing it. But I do think there's some retards within whole of NATO. There has to be at least a delirious Baltic chihuahuas who are talking crap all the time, who think that, yeah, we're just going to use this blurry line. We're going to go in and hit the Russians. And if they hit us back, then somehow we can kind of claim Article 5 in some way. Even if it's, I think they're betting more on the idea that, yeah, if the Russians come in and hit us hard, right? The Americans have to do something. Otherwise, it's basically a shit stain on their face, right? Yeah, you're part of NATO, but any NATO country can go into some war and they're going to get fucked, wiped off the face of the earth. And, basically being part of NATO means nothing. Obviously, the Americans understand that within their own geopolitical short and long-term interest, having a direct conflict with Russia, fuck it, having a direct conflict with Iran is not something that they want. Like, if they do this, it's the biggest fuck up ever, because they're just going to be there in a quagmire, and they're going to watch the Russians not the Russians, the Chinese, just laughing all the way to the bank, telling them, yeah, within a decade, we're basically going to replace you, and you're a bunch of fucking idiots. So, just to kind of like narrow it down, because I've blabbered quite a bit, I do think that Zelensky right now is betting on some unhinged actors within NATO to directly intervene on his behalf, and thus trigger a sort of domino NATO intervention effect, right? It's going to be one NATO country, kind of like or a couple of NATO countries doing a coalition of the willing type of bullshit. These people get hit, and then they have to somehow drag in the United States and hope that this is going to be the winning, like either the Russians back down, or NATO wet dreams about carpet bombing Moscow or whatever. But these people, like as you said, they really don't think about the proper consequences of this. Like tactical nukes, big 100, 200 tactical nukes used at once, all fucking airfields, bases within Europe getting smashed in like less than an hour. So I kind of like want to ask you, like, what do you guys think? If you were like betting people, what are the percentages of some fucking rabbit, Baltoid, Finn, whatever, even some other country going in and doing something stupid like this?
Right now, zero, because you need to know who's going to do it. I don't think the Romanian army is preparing to cross the PMR and Moldova to go and attack the Russians from Ukraine. And the whole point is to attack the Russians without having to do it from Ukraine. Because one of the things that I think is that once you're in Ukraine, you're fair game. Doesn't matter which side. That's exactly how the Americans have played this, proxy war of game. So, to me, for the Americans, it makes no sense to, say, okay, you know what, Polish guys, just go at it. Then how are they going to... In order for the Poles to do anything, which would be attacking Kaliningrad, for instance. But then you're not fighting the war in Ukraine anymore. You are literally attacking Russia, and then it's a domino effect. If the Americans want to have this domino effect over Kaliningrad and have a bunch of billion people nuked, yeah, fine. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the problem with human free will. A lot of people are going to take decisions that are absolutely senseless. I mean, the jails are filled with these guys. But I do not see anyone, for instance, the Finns, as I said, they do not have the force for that. And in order for them to generate, they will have to handicap their fucking economy. Now, it could be the Finns with an American contingent, but right now the contingent in Finland is not big enough. Is it going to be down the road, like in 6 months or a year? Maybe. But that would mean that the situation would require that risk, because this is also another thing. A lot of people are giving shit to America for, pussyfooting all this stuff. But America is doing a fucking great job of not going beyond the red lines. A lot of people are saying, yeah, they gave ATACMS and this happened. For fuck's sake. At the end of the day, ATACMS or TWK, for the Russians, it was more or less the same fucking situation. The issue is that Ukrainians were dunces in 2022 until they had the planning to take over Kharkov, and they are even more dunces in 2024. That's why the ATACMS given hasn't changed radically the war. Actually, it has put the Ukrainians in a worse situation, and this is something that we said, is that you are going to start slowly lowering the flexibility of the units, because you fire only 1 or 2 ATACMS instead of firing 6 or 12 HIMARS, despite the range. But also, once the Russians get burned once or twice, they change a lot of things. And the biggest problem is that right now, keeping the war in the southeastern part of Ukraine makes it easier for the Russians to have that reach. So when you're gonna bomb, I don't know, a air base in Taganrog, they're just gonna move 200 kilometers away. It's not gonna reduce their bombing rhythm. I had this discussion with a retard Nafwit who said, "Oh yeah, 200 kilometers more is gonna reduce the tempo of bombing." You can ask Zelensky if it reduced it. It didn't, because a lot of these people do not understand that the flight hour for the Russians it's about 750 kilometers to up to 1,000 kilometers. So adding 200 more is going to be 5 minutes, 15 minutes more flying. The only thing you're going to reduce when it comes to the cap, for instance, is going to be your loiter time. But because of what they're facing in Ukraine generally, the Russians have an upper hand both operationally and logistically. Therefore, if you have to analyze it properly and not just say, okay, someone's going to decide to do it, which, it's a bit like wishful thinking, then you start like counting your eggs. But before you hatch them, of course. Finland doesn't have the capability right now. The Baltics, all together, there are maybe 20,000 people that they can line up. They don't have tanks. They have some shitty armored APCs. Most of their artillery is already in Ukraine. They have supplies for roughly 5 weeks of combat, but this time they're not going to fight in Baltoid land, but they're going to have either to attack Kaliningrad or they're going to have to move their asses in Ukraine. Irrelevant, useless. Then you have the fucking poodle in the fucking room, which is the Polish guys. Thank God they have most of the shit they can basically pretend it's not them. They have already sent to Ukraine, which is the T-72M1Rs and the PT-91s. And everything else that they might try and use, they have in such limited quantities that the kind of war they're facing right now in Ukraine would also put them bingo within 3 to 4 months, whatever they send as a advanced group. Now, you're going to tell me like they're going to have some kind of peacekeeping operation. Fine. Under whose mandate? UN? Forget about it. The only peacekeeping operation that's going to fucking be potentially allowed is going to be a NATO force. But we know since 1999, actually since the first war in 1995, that thing doesn't fly without the UN. We have the cases, for instance, in Abkhazia and Ossetia from the Russian perspective. But those forces, they had to be respected because the Russians came in and stomped the Georgians. In this case, you are not dealing with separatists. You're going to have the Polish detachment duking it out with the Russians. And given how ill-prepared I've seen the Ukrainians trained in the West to actually fight that kind of war, I cannot fathom how badly prepared Western soldiers are going to be in there. And then you're going to rely on whose logistics? Ukrainian ones? Ukrainians have now huge problems trying to deal with this shit themselves. So add into that guys who have TTPs that are completely out of whack with this war. If you want, it's going to look like the Russians starting the war in 2022, but you're going to replace them with the Poles. They're going to try and have this huge dragonad, huge push down the road, getting eliminated one after the other within 2 weeks. Whatever fucking peacekeeping force you're going to send in Ukraine, it would be badly mauled. And then indeed you might have this logic where the Americans are going to say, okay, this is enough. The Poles got fucked up. We need to do something. And I agree, that's the risk. But because that's the risk, I think America's going to grab the Poles by the fucking ear and say, listen here, you poodle. You bark, it's nice, but don't wet yourself, please. And then there might be another problem. And that other problem is we're going to have even more gung-ho Germans being elected. And if you have a Baerbock on steroids with Merz, then we're going to have another problem because that escalation he wants to do, like he said, yeah, we're gonna lift the limitations of strikes within Russia, and then we're gonna give Taurus. I'm like, Taurus doesn't, Storm Shadow, Atacams, at the end, it's not gonna change much. It's gonna be few pieces. You are going to cause problems, sure, but then those problems are gonna be replicated on Ukrainians. Situation is gonna even more deteriorate for them, and you're gonna have to make a decision. Like, I just gave Taurus, I made the situation worse for the Ukrainians, I'm merged as a chancellor, what do I do? That is one risk of him going completely adult and trying to have this whole brigade division nonsense with the whole fucking European willing, and then send this bullshit through Ukraine to fight the Russians. Now, imagine these guys under the helm of a German force trying to move towards Russian positions in Ukraine. How fucked up of a symbolism this is gonna be? They already fucked up tigers, leopards, cats, pussies, and in Kursk even. Like, how the fuck do you think this is gonna sound for anyone in Russia, but also people around them? The symbol, the optics of this are going to be crushing. In Germany itself, imagine you are with your fucking Puma, you get roasted by FPVs, and you see hands getting out of there, half burning, half gutted, and you got a Russian Mavic with a made in China logo going down 3-4 meters, making a snap, this is for my cringe collection, and you're gonna have it all over Twitter. How do you think the German population, which right now has a huge problem with how the fucking country is driven to the abyss, and it has nothing to do with Ukraine, it's just choices that Germans made and then they reneged in 21-22. How do you think this is going to look? So right now, when you do the counting, you're going to see that the only way for this to happen is if America is okay. But if America is okay with this, that means that a lot of shit is going to happen before. PPS stocks are going to be completely refilled. You're going to have ships coming and going for 2-3 months in order to have enough troops. And of course, that means that a lot of aircraft will be there. If you see American aircraft going from the roughly 80 to 120 to like 400-500, then you have a problem. So once again, it will only depend on how America is going to do this. If the Americans are that suicidal for whatever reason, then I'm sorry, bro. Like, buy a bunker, Yodin, and hope for the best. That's it. But a country going solo and then dragging the whole NATO with them, it looks to me as extremely improbable, because in order for them to drag NATO in it, it would have to be a first NATO unanimous decision. Don't forget, Article 5 is also not automatic. Article 5 and Article 4 call for consultation and a decision to be made. But I would be like paying bullions, honestly, to see how the Americans are going to fucking be okay with Article 5 started by a solo operation from Poland. Especially if, as I think, that operation is going to absolutely get gutted within a few weeks. And on top of it, if that operation is not limited to Ukraine, but actually attacks Russia head-on out of nowhere, don't forget, right now there is no casus belli for Poland to attack Russia. So it will be an act of aggression. Therefore, we go to an Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which opens everybody, but literally everybody who wants to fuck Poland in the ass, to go on the Russian side. And I think that the Chinese will take over that opportunity. Not because they hate Poland or hate Europe, no, but because that would allow Europe to go even more in the fucking quagmire. It's not good for business for China, but it would force the Europeans to start doing something that haven't done for a long time, which is destroying capital. Right now, capital destruction in Europe is rather limited. But if Europe starts a nonsensical war based on a Chihuahua or poodle stupid shit, then for the Chinese it's gonna be fine, because like they are gonna start supplying both sides, especially when it's gonna come to drones, to all this shit. Like, it doesn't really fucking matter for them, given how this case, with the risk of developing if the Poles or the Baltics or whoever actually attacks Russia and not intervenes through Ukraine, because that's the thing. Right now, NATO is saying openly, we are not at war with Russia, therefore there is no casus belli. On the legalist approach, NATO is stuck on its own attempt to, play the proxy war. If from the beginning NATO had said, okay, we have a casus belli, breach of peace in Europe, act of aggression based on the UN Charter, fine, boom. They could have done. They have 3 years, they haven't done it. Why? And as I said, because they are not ready for it. Maybe they will be ready. As I said, you need to check how many troops are going to be deployed, how many aircraft, how the situation is also going to turn when it comes to morale. Right now, Ukrainian morale is fucking to the gutter. They are not boasting anymore. They've gone to full Rada. Even if you compare 2 weeks ago, it wasn't like this. Now everybody's like the upcoming betrayal of Ukraine. Even Russia is Rada posting. So there are right now no signs for it. But I agree with you. It's always a possibility, especially if we're speaking about the Poles. So yeah, that was it more or less.
Yeah, and I'm just going to reiterate one more thing. Maybe I didn't catch it. Why do you think, besides the point that I made earlier, why do you think they keep talking about this whole bullshit about North Korean troops? Obviously it could be some sort of Buryats or some people from Ingushetia or whatever, Asian looking people. Why do they want to bring up this shit? What's the point?
Yeah, but that's the persons who brought up this point were the Ukrainians themselves. The source for this is not NATO. The source for this is Ignat. The source for this is the SBU. These guys, don't forget, they started with the Syrians that were supposed to be there, Iranians that were supposed to be there. Then the only thing that we found is Russians tricking Nepalese to fight the war, bringing some peoples from Cuba, from Angola, from Africa. But this is absolutely, mirrored by the international legend. Don't forget that Ukrainians boasted 20,000 people from the get-go. So it's extremely complicated there to try and mix these things. The problem, as you said, is having this narrative going, Colin Powell, 2002, weapons of mass destruction at the UNSC. This is too big. You see that this bullshit. You understand that this is bullshit. There is nothing there. But they're gonna try. The same way they tried with, there were the Iranian ballistic missiles. Where are they? I know where they are. But, yeah, where are they? We had Chinese drones. Where are these Chinese drones? So far, the myth of the axis of evil, of axis of whatever, intervening in Russia is far less proven than actually leaks from the Pentagon itself pointing out there are special forces within the Ukrainian ranks, that there are people from actual militaries of the NATO bloc in Ukraine right now doing wet work. So this is nothing new. I mean, the Germans leaked out that the French were putting pieces of scalps in Odis and crossing the border with them. This is like, as I told you, this is not going to change much. What is going to change much if this thing starts to pick up. And right now, it hasn't picked up pace. The only people who are relaying this shit are nobodies. Even when asked I think it was the Department of State, Yapper, who said, we're concerned about reports, we haven't seen anything real yet. And at the end of the day, as I said, this is not going to be used as some kind of dope rope from the Americans. If they want to intervene, they will have to prepare that for months. So it's not because of an eventual intervention or an eventual bunch of Koreans that they're going to say, this is it. Like, for fuck's sake, bro. I mean, the Russians have been completely dominating manpower-wise the Ukrainians now for probably end of 2022. It is just a matter of calculus. On that aspect that I said, America is to be applauded. They had a plan, they know their limits, they know where they need to go, and everything else is just fucking window dressing. Everybody was super fucking afraid about the Atacams. Please tell me what is the result of that. And everybody's going to say, but they are limiting the strikes. That's bullshit. Even if they weren't limiting the strikes, the core target they're going to hit are a few installations that you need to hit at the same time. And for the moment, the Ukrainians cannot do it because it's too visible and they risk a huge attrition of those forces. Storm Shadow is there for now a year and a half. First strike was in May. They even demolished the historical building of the Black Sea Fleet. Russians are going to take Pokrovsk. They took Ugledar. Once again, the biggest problem of all this is the people who are fighting the war on the Ukrainian side they look like fucking Redditors. I'm sorry to say it like this. It's just a bunch of stats cobbled together, and that thing's gonna fucking take it. Sometimes I think these guys are either mentally ill, either there are some kids in a simulation playing some video game, or they are not really having an understanding of what it means. And it's very weird that it was so precise and so well choreographed until end of 2022, and from there on, it has been a shit show. So if you want to see an actual intervention, we already had it, in my opinion. And Kharkov, the way Kharkov went, bears the fucking footprint of someone who knows everything needs to strike, who knows how things work, who knows also where the Russians actually want to fight. And I'm not going to say that Russia didn't fought in Izium and Balaklia and Kharkov. No, it's just that the person who did that op knew exactly how it would go. And it was so swift up to a certain point, because after that they started to get upended, got stopped in a bit back road. But it looks like the early stages of operation was like some kind of validation of a maneuver plan. It worked perfectly, and then once that validation went out, suddenly Ukraine started to fucking slow down. Who knows? Because at the same time you have Syrskyi fucking up completely everything, including Kursk. But in Kharkov, it was perfect. So if you want to look for signs about quote-unquote intervention, maybe it already happened. Take Moscow. They boasted for a short time frame in April. They did it. Because it would open, the whole defense around Snake Island. And Russians failed there. So I do not think if Americans want to do it, they know that it will cost them a lot more than whatever they've done so far. And the whole point has been to maintain the denial of any kind of intervention. And right now we have this crew card in a striker, but that meant nothing, given that most of the strikers, especially the refuel vehicles, both for strikers and for Bradleys and also for Max Pros and Cougars are coming from actual National Guard stocks, because part of the prepositioned stocks in Europe are from National Guard stocks left behind. Like the early Bradleys, the first 24 came from Bradley ODS that were first deployed in Syria in 2020. So once again, like it makes no much sense to start speculating right now on who, how, and everything if you don't have the science to see it. And there are no signs right now because, first of all, America is in an election year, and they don't want that bullshit to absolutely backblast by giving the adversary ammunition. So we will anyway need to wait after the month of January. But the most important part is that if the Americans wanted to intervene, they have had 2.5 fucking years to do it. And that would have been a lot more problematic for the Russians because the Russians were rebuilding completely in 2022. In 2022, they lost so many fucking shit, and they were in such a low point that once you analyze it properly, except for Bakhmut, it was winter that saved them in Kharkov, going to Lugansk. So I just don't see it. I don't see how the Americans are going now into a operational cauldron, which is a completely different aspect from 2022, when every single motherfucker has an FPV drone to hit you, and when it's now evident the Americans cannot suppress most of the frequencies that both sides are using in Ukraine. So how do you think this is going to turn around? Right now, the Americans understand that they don't want to fucking get in this mix. They only want to make it last as long as possible to hurt the Russians. But at some point, given what Zelensky is writing, and the lack of, as I said once again, obvious references to reconquering the land, it looks like the Americans are saying, you know what, you need to freeze the war. And all the other attempts with the Norks, with Iraqis, with Syrians, with Africans, is just Ukraine trying to stay relevant on its point where they want to point out, see, Russians are doing this, please help us. And you had that before. Like, oh, North Korea transferring ballistic missiles. Why are you stopping us? I'm like, nobody stopped it, but Atacams is only 300 kilometers. Even if they give the Ukrainians the green light. Same for Storm Shadow and Jasmine and everything. The problem is a technical, political issue that Ukrainians do not want to understand. What Ukrainians want, as I said, they just want the West to come in and fight their war. All the complaints about supplies, all the complaints about logistics, all the complaints about manpower, all the complaints about armament are just meant to coalesce into a point where we are exhausted, please come fight our war. And this is what I said when we had the space, I don't know if you remember, with that guy who said, yeah, but GDP. It's not about the GDP. It's the Fiat 500 with the BMW M5. Okay, Russia is a third-hand BMW M5 from 2000 something, but your Fiat 500, even if it's a 596 or whatever, is still a small car. Never mind how much fuel you're going to pour into that. Best case scenario for you, you're going to blow up the fucking engine. On the other, that shit's going to go for ages. It's not going to be very beautiful. There are better cars right now, which is the Russian military, but it will go faster and longer than your shitty Fiat. On the other side, now we have a completely different logic. Now we have Ukraine with no money, no income, being on the dole, living at the parents or whatever, willing to buy a Ferrari in order to race Russia. And Russia on the other side, only knowing how to make Kamaz, wants to turn Kamaz into McLaren. And so far, Ukrainians are not even able to buy a wheel, and the Russians are trying to put a ship engine to a Kamaz in order to make it go as fast as a McLaren. It's the complete distortion and disbalance of these two sides, but also doing shit that's completely mad. On one side, you have the Russians picking the shit out of everyone and then doing mad charges straight forward. On the other side, Ukrainians trying to do mobility warfare with basically up-armored trucks. And then everybody gets excited on, oh, they lost so many vehicles, but on the other side, the Ukrainians are pulling back. So this is the madness we have right now. And this is why I think all the Nork shit, all the invention, all the hyperbole is going on so hard from Ukrainian side. They want a breakthrough and they will do everything to have it. It's literally like Dave LaChapelle's skit with the fucking cokehead or crackhead. Well, he says, I'll suck your dick. That's how bad Ukraine is right now. They're ready to anything. Kursk is nothing. These people, if they can, they'll fucking nuke Russia. And that's where I want to come with this, for the Americans seeing how bad these guys are down. Americans do not want this. Nobody wants a crackhead with a fucking nuke. And in a certain sense, the whole fucking thing that they can still have advanced weaponry on their own, because of course Ukraine wasn't a desert, is I think what worries Americans a lot more than Russian bombardment. Because if they can produce even 15, 20, 30 grams per year, I'm gonna tell you guys, first thing they're gonna do is symbolic shit. I have no problem imagining Zelia saying, hit the Kremlin. Because Ukrainians consider weakness what Kremlin doesn't do. The Russians are like, it doesn't fucking matter. Blowing the Bankova, blowing whatever. At the end of the day, what's going to change at the front line? For the Ukrainians, not like that. For the Ukrainians, it's like, haha, we blow your fucking castle. When they attacked the bridge in 2022, I remember every single Ziggler was so down. Oh my God, it's over. Now we are 2 years after. Where are we now, bitch? This is the difference between the mice brain of the GSU leadership and how the Russians see war. And I know that a lot of people don't like this. I have a couple of comments, oh, it's too fucking long. Yeah, well, fucking hell, it's the biggest country in fucking Europe. What the hell do you want from me? Not everybody has the chance to invade the country, which is 2 highways and 3 power plants. That's it. Period. Okay, guys, sorry for being bothersome and long. If anybody has any kind of anything to add, it's up to you. Otherwise, yeah. So it will be. Okay. Well, it's gonna be. Okay, this was an impromptu space. There is a space coming this weekend, and it will be centered around the potential loss of Kurakovo. Don't make me say things that I didn't say. Krakow hasn't fell yet, but the Russians have apparently crossed from the east, from Kostre to Kurakovo, and that is going to change a megaton of things at the front line now, especially the potential connection from Ugledar to Kurakovo. And as I said, it would completely ease the attempts from the Russian side to attack Pokrovsk, but also push towards Velika Novosilka. And it will, this is the most important part, stretch the Ukrainian lines, given how they are forced to defend in smaller pockets by repelling the Russians by using the bodies of water and topographic features. Once Krakow is bypassed, so the complete, then you're going to start having a flat, and on that flat, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, given how it's going to be like some kind of 90 degrees angle at the front, the UMPKs are going to change the war, especially on that sector, for like ever. Unless things happen to stop Su-34s from dropping bombs, the whole area there is going to probably collapse and slowly go down. Within 2 to 3 months. Probably Ukrainians will have to accept defeat in the sector and address that problem by, as I said, for sure getting out of Kursk, but most importantly, I think they will have to abandon either the defense of southern Pokrovsk, either any kind of stupid plan they might have for the northern border towards Russia. So be that Bryansk, be that further Kursk, be that Belgorod, or who knows. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for being here. Probably during the weekend we're going to have another space, a lot more focused on potential loss of Krakow. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.